So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the Buddha and about his teaching. And so the Buddha's first sermon after his enlightenment, if you remember, he sat under the Bodhi tree and meditated, determined not to get up again until he reached enlightenment, until he had attained what he had been searching for many, many years for. And so the first sermon after that happened took place in a place called the Deer Park in India and in southern India. And the first sermon centered on what he called the Four Noble Truths. We've spoken about those before, but I just want to reiterate them. They're the foundation of Buddhism. And one way to understand the concept is to view these truths as kind of like hypotheses. These are things, rather than truth in the sense of ultimate truth, these are almost like scientific truths, hypotheses that you test and try again and again and see if they work or not. Because Buddhism is the process of verifying truth or realizing that truth about the ultimate truth. So the Four Noble Truths are these. One is the truth of suffering. The second is the true cause of suffering, understanding that. Then the third is the truth about the end of suffering. And then the fourth noble truth is the truth of understanding a path that frees us from suffering. So that first noble truth is often translated as life is suffering. And that's not exactly positive in the way it sounds, right? It's not as dire as that, though. It's actually quite the opposite, and why it's often confusing to people. And a lot of the reason is because of the English translation of that Pali Sanskrit work that I've spoken about before. We all remember, I hope you all remember, is what? Dukkha, that word dukkha. And it's translated as suffering. According to another Buddhist monk, a Theravadan monk and scholar, Ajahn Sumedho, the word actually means that it's incapable of satisfying. Life is incapable of satisfying, or it's not able to bear or withstand anything. And so a lot of other scholars replace that word suffering with the word stressful. And you remember I've compared it to a man riding on a cart down a bumpy road, and he's hitting that cart. And you remember old carts didn't have shocks like we have on our cars today. And he's on a smooth path, and everything's going along just fine. And then suddenly, boom, he hits a rut, and then he hits another rut, and then he hits a series of ruts. That's dukkha. You can compare that to riding on the FDR in your car, if you've ever ridden on the FDR. Even now, after they keep trying to repair it, it's still like that. Or frankly, on most of the roads in New Jersey, they're a lot like that. So that's what dukkha is. And the Buddha wasn't saying that everything about life is horrible. In his other sermons, he spoke about many, many types of happiness, like the happiness of family life. But as we look more closely, that fell off, look more closely at dukkha, we see that dukkha can touch everything, even in our lives, even good fortune and happy times. They all eventually end. Now, that second noble truth teaches that the cause of suffering is greed or desire. And that actually, that word for greed or desire in the original Pali text is a word called tanha. And tanha is really translated better as craving. We continually search for something outside of ourselves to make us happy. But no matter how successful we are, we're never really satisfied. We never remain satisfied. And that second truth is telling us that we must give up everything we love, isn't telling us rather that we have to give up everything we love to find happiness. The real issue is it's more subtle. Okay, it's the attachment to what we desire that gets us into trouble. I've got my iPhone here, This, I think, is my seventh iPhone. Not that the first one didn't work. The first one worked just fine. But Verizon and Apple they convinced me that it wasn't good enough. Don't be satisfied with that iPhone. Get the iPhone 2 when it came out. This is now iPhone 11. And I think they're already working on iPhone 12. Maybe they have it already. I don't know. But that's the idea of desire. We get this desire that nothing really satisfies us. I have a friend who he still has a flip phone. And I laugh at him all the time. And I say, why do you have a flip phone? It's 2021. And he said, this one works just fine. That's a guy who understands he doesn't need to buy into that craving for the latest fad or the latest thing or to be gripped by it. And the Buddha taught us that this thirst grows from ignorance of the self. We go through life grabbing one thing after another to get a sense of security about ourselves. In Buddhism, this is called monkey mind. If you've seen monkeys in the jungle or even in the cities, when I was in India, and even in the cities, in Delhi and in Madras, the bigger cities, monkeys are all over the place. And there are trees growing around that have bananas. And the monkeys, you can see them. They're just going around grabbing banana. They're swinging from the trees, just grabbing one banana after another. And if they can't get a banana, they'll come down and grab the banana that you have in your hand. But they're just constantly going from one tree to another to satisfy that craving. That's monkey mind that we're afflicted with. And we attach not only to physical things, but also to ideas and opinions about ourselves and about the world around us. And then we grow frustrated when the world doesn't behave the way we think it should, and our lives don't conform to the way we want them to be. The third noble truth talks about the solution of how we stop clinging and attaching and experiencing dukkha. And how do we do that? Well, the fact is we can't accomplish it by an act of will. It's impossible to just vow to yourself, from now on, I won't crave anything. And it doesn't work because the conditions that give rise to that craving are always present. There's always something to remind you that you don't have something. You don't have the latest shirt. You don't have the happiness with your spouse that you want, or you don't have the figure that you want, or you don't have whatever it may be. You don't have enough money. You don't have this. You don't have that. Because the craving is always there. We're always reminded. And that noble truth tells us that we cling to things because we believe they'll make us happy and keep us safe. Grasping, one ephemeral thing after another never satisfies us, at least not for long, because they're impermanent. The craving seems to disappear of itself, though, when we see for ourselves that we can stop grasping if we want to. The Buddha taught that through diligent practice, we can put an end to craving. It's not going to happen overnight. It may not even happen by the end of our life, but eventually craving will end. We can at least get to a point where we're not craving as much. That's the idea, is to keep doing that. We end that hamster wheel chase until we reach enlightenment, bodhi. And that fourth noble truth the Buddha taught about is called the Eightfold Path. He said there's a path that you can follow to try to end craving, the Eightfold Path. And unlike many other religions, Buddhism has no particular benefit to merely believing in a doctrine. The emphasis is on practice in daily life. And that Eightfold Path is comprised of 8 different kinds of practice that really they all work together. You can't do, you can do one without the other, but it won't be as effective. And they are this. The first one is the right view or right understanding, which is insight into the true nature of reality. The next one is right intention, which is an unselfish desire to realize enlightenment. We don't want to seek enlightenment just for ourselves. Next one is right speech, using speech compassionately or wisely. In Buddhism, there's the word upaya. Upaya means skillful means, being tactful in the way we say things, saying things compassionately, lovingly. The next one is right action, using ethical conduct to show compassion to other people. Then there's right livelihood, making a living through a profession or a way that is ethical and doesn't cause anybody else harm. Next is right effort, which is working toward these things that culminate in us developing these qualities of compassion and loving kindness and all of these things, those wholesome qualities. Right mindfulness. We hear about mindfulness a lot these days, but mindfulness cannot be separated from those other things. And so mindfulness is a whole body mind awareness that we're supposed to cultivate. And the last one is right concentration, which is really about meditation or some other form of concentrated practice that we take up on a daily basis to focus ourselves and think about what we're trying to achieve. I mean, all of those in themselves and the Four Noble Truths, each of those could be a sermon in themselves. But today, I want to talk about something that I briefly mentioned in the past, but never really spoke at length about. I've alluded to it, but that's it. And these are called the Five Remembrances. And the Five Remembrances are 5 truths that the Buddha said we should all contemplate and accept. I have to correct myself. The Buddha, we're not sure if the Buddha actually said these or if his disciples later on compiled these together. But generally, these are called the Buddha's 5 Remembrances. And he said that we should all contemplate and accept these things. And in fact, according to the common understanding of it, he told his disciples that reflecting on these 5 truths caused the factors of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to really take birth in our lives, to really understand them. To understand these 5 remembrances helps us to work better with those Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. And so the 5 remembrances are these. The first one says, I am of the nature to grow old. There is no way to escape growing old. Number 2, I am of the nature to have ill health. There is no way to escape ill health. Number 3, I am of the nature to die. There is no way to escape death. Number 4 says, all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. There is no way to escape being separated from them. And the last one says, my actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. So maybe you're thinking or saying to yourself, that's really kind of depressing. I don't know if Buddhism is for me. And I'm not trying to get anyone to practice Buddhism or anything, but just to consider what's being said, because it's really kind of universal. But if you're thinking that way, the Zen monk who we heard in the meditation, Thich Nhat Hanh, he says that we should not suppress knowledge of our frailty and impermanence because these are the fears that lie in the depths of our consciousness. And to be free of these, we must invite the remembrances into our consciousness and stop seeing them as enemies. I think all of us know that most of us, at least at some point in our life, or maybe you still do, or you know people who just don't want to talk about these things. Don't want to talk about getting sick, don't want to talk about dying, don't want to talk about somebody else dying. You know, we suppress that. Well, those first three remembrances are basically really what drove the Buddha to leave his life of luxury and go out and eventually become the Buddha. You remember they were the central wake up calls to him before his enlightenment, before he woke up. You remember the story? He was raised in the lap of luxury and behind the walls of the castle where his father was the king. He had everything he wanted. He had all the food, all the money, all the women, everything he wanted. He even had a wife and children. Well, at least one child that we know of. But he had never been outside the castle walls. But he was curious. And one day he decided to, one night he decided to leave and just escape out over the castle walls and see what was going on. And as he was going through the town, you remember what he did? He looked and he saw an old man walking along the road who was all bent and stooped over. And then he saw another person who was sick on the side of the road. And he had never seen these things. And then the last thing it says he saw was a corpse, a dead body. And he was confused. And he went back to the castle and he thought about these things, but he didn't tell anybody. And he decided he had to learn what the real world was all about. And so eventually he left and wandered around seeking the answer to these things. The denial of old age and sickness and death is a lot more prevalent than it was in the Buddha's time. There was no escaping it back then. People lived in the street. They lived in villages where they were just common everyday things. People got sick and people died. It's not that they didn't feel badly about it, but they were just more prevalent. But in our culture today, in the 21st century, we actively promote the idea that we can stay young and healthy forever if we try hard enough. Just watch TV for an hour. Watch all the commercials that you see for whatever kind of creams or injections or foods or whatever it may be, medications that the doctor can give you to help you stay young looking or feel young looking. Make sure everything works right. Taking care of one's health is important. It's an excellent thing to do. I know that, and I've learned it the hard way, but there's no foolproof shield from illness. And the effects of aging strike us all. I think that all of us here can pretty much say that, I don't know about, well, maybe we can, but I know about you. I feel a lot older this past year. It's hard to believe, when you're young. But a young person is not who you are or who I am or who even young people are. It's just a temporary condition. I often say to Lisa, it's kind of weird. I know how old I am. I'm 65 years old, but you know what? In my brain, sometimes in my head, I'm still thinking like that 25-year-old or 30-year-old person. Sometimes I act like that 25. Sometimes I act like that 10-year-old person, and I shouldn't. But, we still think that we're not as old as we are. And then we have to stop and we say, how did we get here? And it's, I used to laugh at people when they were older. When I was a kid and I'd laugh and they say, oh, you'll see, it goes really fast. Once you get, you know what? I look and I say, boy, it went really fast. How did I get here? 65. And we're also more separated from death than we used to be. Dying is tucked away from us most of the time in hospitals or sometimes in hospice. Increasingly, some people are choosing to stay at home for hospice care, which is, I think, a good thing. But the thing is that dying is still real. And so is death. We don't see a corpse in the same way that people in the Buddha's age did. So we have sickness and old age and death. And then we have those last two remembrances. The fourth one that says, all that is dear to me and everyone I love are of the nature to change. This is impermanence. This is what it's talking about, impermanence. There's no way to escape being separated from. And then we have a little bit of that dukkha, that unsatisfactoriness. Everything is going to change. All things must pass, like George Harrison sang. Nothing is ever going to be as I want it to be, as I need it to be, or as I think it should be, at least not completely or forever. I can't keep the perfect thing. I can't keep anything. There's a saying in Zen Buddhism. It says the cup that you're drinking your tea from is already broken. Think about that. The cup that you're drinking your tea, or maybe your coffee or your juice, it's already broken. And it reminds us not to become attached to things that are impermanent. But it doesn't mean that we can't love or appreciate things or people that are in our lives. In fact, it helps us to appreciate the preciousness of those people and the preciousness of life even more. We read and we say these things to ourselves, these five remembrances, in the first person. But I think it helps if we also say them in the second person, at least to ourselves, when we look at other people around us, our family, our friends, people we're passing on the street, or people we're passing in the supermarket. If we look at them and remember to ourselves as a reminder, you are of the nature to grow old. You are of the nature to have ill health. You're not going to say this out loud to them, obviously. You are of the nature to die. And then it can really hit home when we look at each other and say, we are of the nature to have ill health. We are of the nature to grow old. We are the nature to die. Because we're all in this same boat of impermanence together. And then there's that fifth remembrance. My actions are my only true belongings. I cannot escape the consequences of my actions. My actions are the ground upon which I stand. The 13th century Zen teacher, Dogen, he expressed it by saying that the meaning of what we do is expressed completely in what we do. In other words, what we do is the thing. My life is being 100% expressed right now. This is what my life looks like right now. There's no backstory. There's no other thing that you don't see. And it's equally true for you wherever you are. Wherever you're viewing this Zoom meeting from. However you're sitting here, however you're breathing, however you're looking at this meeting, that's you. It's not a version of you, but it's you right now in this moment, the culmination so far of your life. And that's the real understanding of karma. What we do each moment matters. And it has consequences, whether they're good or bad. We can choose our actions, but we can't choose the consequences. And so we have to try to live every moment like what we do matters, because it really does. And again, some people hear this and they say, nope, not for me, it's too difficult. And maybe they look to someone or something outside of themselves for help spiritually with this. Perhaps they look to a savior, or maybe they depend on observing certain rituals or religious observances or sacraments. In the Christian tradition, a sacrament is considered an outward sign of an inner grace that's given by God. And Christians aren't the only ones that have sacraments. The Buddha never offered this kind of salvation. In fact, within Buddhism, there's nothing to be saved from except the things that cause us suffering in this life. The things that are outlined in the Four Noble Truths and in the Five Remembrances. The hell that the Buddha's teaching frees us from isn't one that happens in an afterlife. It's the one that we often cause ourselves and suffer from now. And this practice isn't about perfection. It's about coming to know and understand the true nature of reality and ourselves. When we look at certain teachers, even Buddhist teachers, we think, wow, that's a perfect person. But if they're really good teachers, and if they're honest teachers, they will tell you, I'm not perfect yet. The Dalai Lama, I love this story about him one time. You know, a man who believes in nonviolence, complete nonviolence. You know, we always say, oh, he wouldn't hurt a fly. Well, he was asked one time by a reporter about his nonviolence and everything. And so the reporter said, well, what about mosquitoes? When a mosquito lands on you, what do? He says, well, first I shoo it away. And then if it lands back, I shoo it away again. And the reporter says, and if it comes back again, he says, then I do that. It's not about perfection. It's about the true nature of reality and ourselves. And maybe somewhere down the line, we will be better. Maybe we'll be wiser. Maybe we'll be more compassionate. Maybe we'll reach a point where we can grasp less and cling to people and things less and appreciate them for what they are right now in this moment. And maybe we'll come to a place where we truly understand the impermanence and the fragility and the beauty of life. But in this moment, we don't need to focus on that at all. That's the future. We just have to stop fooling ourselves about the nature of our lives. And that's what these five remembrances are about. Not about something out there, not about something down the line. It's the essence of the five remembrances. We should try to remember them every day. I have them on a little place card next to my bed. So I see them at night and I see them in the morning. Maybe you can write the remembrances down and stick them, on your mirror or on your desk or something. Tape it to your kitchen refrigerator and let them soak in. Think about them. Because honestly, we've always known them. They've always been true. But it's always good to remind ourselves anyway. May it be so.
If you enjoyed this video, please like us on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, and click on the bell to be notified whenever we post a new video.